Hi all. In session 3, we'll be looking at the cultural impact and role of culture in international marketing. Another aspect that international marketers need to be aware of is that colors play a role in different cultures. If you take even Sri Lanka, you'll you'll appreciate the fact that the Buddhists wear white for funerals, but on the other hand, Catholics prefer black. In China, red is mostly associated with money, wealth. Likewise, you will have different colors also symbolizing something, some meaning in different cultures. You should be aware of it when you develop your marketing campaigns and especially your communication campaigns. We said culture is a sum total of beliefs, values, and customs of a group of people. Now, we need to remember that based on these values, beliefs, and customs, there will be behavioral patterns that you can observe in these different groups of people. Whilst individual markets or individual groups of people will have their own cultural behavioral patterns or subcultural behavioral patterns, but when you take it as a global pattern, you can see two distinctly different behavioral patterns emerging. Now, this was initially spoken by Professor Gert Hofstede, who spoke about the 5 dimensions of cultures. He said some cultures are very individualistic while other cultures are very collective. So he called it a collectivism behavioral pattern. While the Asian countries or Eastern countries show collectivist behavior in terms of large extended families with head of family, respect for authority, age and seniority. They try to avoid confrontation, they try to be nice to each other, and they share responsibility and follow the leader kind of behavioral pattern. Against that, you will say in most Western countries, Western cultures, there is a very individualistic behavioral aspect displayed. In other words, they stand up for themselves, they believe in competition, they even challenge authority, very independent, they take personal responsibility. And also, when you look at the families, they are more nuclear families, smaller families, self and immediate family. The extended family, no, you have all the family groups. So they show two distinctly different behavioral patterns. What is important for us is understanding this and building our strategy and the communications plan accordingly. For an example, now when you take the ethnic community groups in the UK, it's estimated that more than 10% of the UK population would be different ethnic groups. And the most important thing is they have the spending power. So when they have the spending power, they have purchasing power, it's obvious that you can offer your products and services at these high spenders or people with spending power. And it is a 10% of the population, which is quite a significant number. But if you do not understand them, if you do not understand their culture, their behavioristic patterns, then you are not effectively going to be successful with this type of cultures. Let's look at what can influence a culture. Predominantly, it's a family. The individual is influenced by the family, the social groups, the gender role defined by the particular culture, the work roles, language, values, beliefs. At the same time, on the other hand, the societal environment or the media, the technology development, employment, politics, all these also can affect the cultural development and the evolution. Not forgetting the institutions, the political, legal, religious, educational institutions that basically influence and impact the culture and the evolution of the individual cultures. Of course, not many cultures have remained the same during the last centuries or so. Almost all cultures have evolved, could have taken influences and impacts from surrounding cultures, and they would have mingled with the other cultures, so on. So it's a little bit a tough task to understand all the implications, but it is very important that we understand the individual culture of that market that we target. I spoke about the family. I didn't use the word reference groups as yet, but we need to understand that for individuals, there'll be a set of influences coming through reference groups. The most key reference group in anybody's life is the family. The family is one group that can really impact you and influence you during your growth years. But at the same time, you have other groups that can influence you, change your behavior, change your thinking, change your beliefs, change your values. It could be religious groups, it could be work groups, it could be leisure groups, it could be the club that you belong to. So it could be professional bodies, social or hobby oriented societies. Any of these groups can impact and influence an individual. So therefore, you need to understand how different people would be reacting to outside stimuli. Now, for an example, a Sri Lankan, although the person is born in Sri Lanka, if the person is taken out of the market when he or she is 5 years old and grows up in example 1 in a Western society, example 2 grows up in a Far Eastern society like Japan or China or Korea, once the child has grown into an adult, you will see the person displaying the cultural habits, cultural behaviors of that particular society he or she grew up with. So it is important to understand these reference groups. The society that you live in can influence your cultural behaviors. I mentioned a child growing up in Japan or a child growing up in a Western society. Now, some cultures, we call them high context cultures, and the others low context cultures. When you say a high context culture, it's mostly the Asian, Middle Eastern cultures, markets, where they place a great deal of emphasis on values, position in society, your word, relationships, honor. These are some of the most important things in these societies when you do business. But on the other hand, the low context cultures like UK, USA or Canada, when you work with them, it's black or white, written documents, legal paperwork, information is crystal clear, Everybody wants to know what is on the table. It is not the honor, it is not somebody's word, it is not the trust, but it's a very clear-cut black or white definition. So in case with customers also, you would see that if you take a Western or low context culture, you will have specific instructions, you will have specific terms and conditions very clearly set out for customers to understand. But on the other side, in high context cultures, now only these terms and conditions, labeling, giving information is coming into practice. It's more or less more trust and relationship based. So how do you avoid these cultural issues? I'm sure that you have already identified that if you do not really understand the cultures, the values, beliefs, customs, the behaviors, you can be a failure in those markets. How do you avoid these issues? The most important thing is training in cross-cultural skills, understanding, knowledge, language competence, personal relationships, using case studies, role-playing workshops. These will really help your staff to understand these particular cultures that you are trying to enter into. It's training and development by professional organizations, having staff who are multicultural, who are from that particular culture or who's experienced in those cultures. All these things will help you to avoid these unnecessary cultural issues. Example, Samsung send their managers on boot camps before you start the assignment. IKEA used to send staff to different countries like Russia to stay, do some business, but do business with the natives who spoke Russian, who knew the culture well, who knew the customs well, the beliefs and values of those people well. In fact, IKEA used to have joint ventures before they actually enter the markets such as Russia, because they wanted to understand how these people behave, what are the beliefs, what are the customs, how do they want their houses decorated, or what kind of patterns, designs that they wanted. So avoiding cultural issues is a must. And how do you avoid cultural issues? It could be through training, through workshops, having multicultural staff in your organization, or working very closely with those cultures before you launch the operation. Those are some of the things that you can do. So how do you minimize the cultural impact in negotiations and business? Adaptation. Adapt to those cultural differences. McDonald's was, well, it was mostly beef-based products, but when they work in other cultures such as India, Sri Lanka, they have to adapt. If they adapt, they become much more successful. You would have seen that McDonald's in Sri Lanka, they offer rice. Rice is not a mainstream food in the US, but these products were developed especially for the Asian market, who has a palate for rice. Interpreters. Cultural blocks. Not everything can be translated, but at the same time having interpreters and working very closely with these people from the culture would help you to have better negotiations. And also the intercultural preparation. So you have, probably you can have exchange programs, employing staff as I said before, or your own staff being trained in those cultures. Those are some of the things that you can do to minimize the impact when you are negotiating and when you're conducting business.